Hello, everyone. This is everyone's nightmare that their presentation just before they're supposed to speak disappears. But thank you for bearing with me and listening to this. So I do have something prepared. I'm normally a pen and paper kind of person, and I think I'll throw my laptop after this. Okay.
Throw it at someone.
Yeah, at Microsoft, whoever. Microsoft. Okay, so could I get the slides, please? It's a Hannah ALPA presentation. If those have also been deleted, then. Yes, excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So this is actually a joint work that I've done with Reza, who's sitting here. So I didn't plagiarize his slides. We just we worked on this together. So in the Q&A, please direct your questions to him. So today, what I'd like to talk about is I'd like to avoid the question of the nation state, actually, by looking at the region, and particularly Khorasan, before Afghanistan was even really an idea, and to look at the difficulties of tracing Khorasan on the map, and the difficulties that modern scholars, medieval scholars, and others have done in understanding it. So first, I'd like to trace how Khorasan developed from a vague designation of the East, the land of the rising sun, into a political and cultural reality. But secondly, to explain why it has remained so difficult to define for us. So next slide, please. Or I can just click it. Is that fine? Oh, thank you. All right. So how and when did our modern idea of Khorasan appear? From Bartholomew at the start of the 20th century through to scholars in 2019, 2020, scholars have tried to define what Khorasan was and where its boundaries lay, yet their conclusions are strikingly different. I've organized them into two streams of scholarship. One is that thinks of static Khorasan. So this is Khorasan as a place with defined boundaries, different at different points in different periods over the course of 1,000 years, but as static. So this is, I believe, comes from Guy Lestrange's 1905 book, The Lands of the Eastern Caliphate, where he divides it into 4 quarters, that being a Nishapur, Ma'arib, Herat, and Balkh as the centers, bounded by Transoxiana to the north. Other sort of classic scholars like Minorski, Hersfield follow this pattern. Later in the 1990s, Parvana Pushati distinguished between inner and outer Khorasan, greater, lesser Khorasan. So it's very modern in the past 30 years that we have this distinction. And different scholars have worked with that in different ways. For example, in 2019, Haug folds Toharsan, Transoxiana into a greater Khorasan. And here you can see an example of Guy Lestrange mapping. You can see the province of Khorasan there with some questionable lines through it, through our modern nation states. A second stream was what I call the dynamic Khorasan. So one that does shift across time, although some disagree in the direction of this change. So Bosworth in Encyclopedia of Islam wrote that in early Islam, Khorasan could mean almost everything east of Western Iran, stretching as far as the Indus Valley. But then people disagree about the shades. So did it begin encompassing Transoxiana, like Lemon said, Sijistan and beyond, but then contracted? That's what a contemporary Iranian journal, the Greater Khorasan Research Journal, also finds. But Rakarante in the edited volume, Greater Khorasan, finds the opposite direction of change, that Khorasan began small as a Khorasan proper and then expanded later. And here's a map of Bosworth. You can see Khorasan in the blue. It's this big amorphous section on the left, changes boundaries again in the Seljuk Empire, and then is restricted in the modern sense toward the end of the Cossack period. So, okay, so we can't even agree on where the boundaries are. Were they shrinking? Were they expanding? Were they static dynamic? So part of this problem is not just modern historians. We can also look at medieval geographers who found that they also disagreed, and the disagreements reflected two different traditions, the Iraqi school and the Balkhi school of Islamic geography in the classical period. So the Islamic geographers writing largely from Baghdad in the 9th and 10th centuries, continued the Sasanian tradition of dividing the world into quarters or kusts, and Khorasan was the eastern kust, with Baghdad at the center of the world. Here we have Reza's famous maps that he's created, emphasizing the roads and the links between them. So they didn't have a concept of boundaries in the same way that we do. Obviously, they thought of how long it takes to get from one place to another, and we have sort of quarters where everything is. And I'm not going to read through each of the particular geographers. By contrast, the Balkhi school, you can see, I don't know how to make maps. We just have the names of the school. They had a geographic innovation in dividing the world into provinces. So not just generally an area, but the different provinces based on culture, geography, identity to an extent. And they separated Khorasan into its own province and distinguished it from Transoxiana, which is the land beyond the river, beyond the Oxus. And finally, the Hudud al-Alam, they innovated, the anonymous author innovated even further, and instead of looking at provinces or kusts or quarters, probably he, looked at the hudud, or the boundaries of the different regions, placing the main cities of Shaha and the hudud, the boundaries of Khorasan. And here we have both the boundaries where he said they would be, the Amudarya in the north, the East Hindustan, etc., and then also the main cities that they list, and also the marshes. So there's also maybe not disagreement, but different ways of thinking about the region, even in the time of among contemporaries. So I think we need to go back even further, if you'll continue with me, all the way back through the millennia, because long before the name Khorasan, the region had other designations. In the Avesta, it appears as Bakhti, which is the root of the Achaemenid Bakhtarsha, which was a satrapy of the Achaemenids, centered around the Amudarya. Greek authors called it Bactria, which is Balkh as its capital, which was then inherited by the Kushans, who divided into Bactria and Toharistan, maintaining control on both sides of the Amudarya, which later under the Sasanians became Kushan Shah, which was governed by royal family members styling themselves as Kushan Shah. So this is what Professor Warfield was talking about quite clearly and quite specifically about the local governance, and obviously Reza's paper also. So in this period, the idea of Iran Shah, or the realm of the Iranians, appears on Shahpur's inscription. The idea of Iran Shah originates from the Avesta, but the Sasanians transformed it and applied it to their empire. So an idea became a political and geographic reality in this period. Iran Shah became the main region of the Iranian political and cultural domain, with its core extending from Amudarya to the Euphrates. And Kushan Shah became the eastern part, you can see, of their Iran Shah. And the center remains Balkh, which continues to be the heart of the Eastern Iranian world. I've said that term. And until the middle of the Sasanian period, there was no entity known as Khorasan. I'll briefly just go through what happened next in the interest of time. So from the 4th century onwards, the climactic shifts, and for other reasons, in the Altai Mountains in Central Asia displaced nomadic peoples and confederations, mainly the Kidarites, the Hephthalites, and the Alphans. Collectively, these were known as the Shun, or the Huns, who moved into Bactria, adopting some of the Iranian practices, but had some distinct customs such as skull elongation and shamanic rituals. The Hunnish people moved to Sogdian and Bactria, where they clashed with the Sasanians, and eventually they made an alliance with the Sasanians and helped them in their war against the Romans in Anatolia, and gradually replaced the Kushan Sasanians. And they've minted coins, they produced Bactrian documents, which are quite famous. And in these Bactrian documents, they've found there's a new world, Mirasan, which is, here are the coins. We have in this document here on the top right, the Mirasan, meaning the east. So for rulers like the Alkhans north of the Hindu Kush, south of the Hindu Kush, they became the kings of the east as a political statement. And this linguistic innovation would prove foundational, because Mirasan would later be translated into Middle Persian as Khorasan, which is the land where the east of sun rises in Persian. And Reza has talked about this in detail, so I won't go into how it became a province. But basically, we talked about the Sasanians when they have their four regions, the Kus. That was because when they defeated the Hephthalites, they reorganized their empire. And Khorasan wasn't just an abstract idea, but they had, or not just symbolism, but because it had its own general, a Spahmed, they had guardians, Marzbon for the borders. And unlike the Western regions, which relied on the local Dehans, Khorasan was ministered through military offices, underscoring the role as a frontier. And thus, so by the late Sasanian period, Khorasan was an administrative military zone stretching from Homs to the west and Amudarya in the east. And Reza's talked about the Maya province of Khorasan. So when the Arabs come and okay.
It's okay.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I'll just skip this part because we've talked about it. But this is the period where Khorasani under the Abbasid revolution also becomes more than just a geography, but also a political and cultural label, which was central to the Abbasid and the Caliphate, the Abbasid and the Caliphate. Oh. Okay. All right, I won't go through the successor dynasties, although I think they're very interesting. We can talk about in Q&A. I'll just end here, just to run through some of the conclusions, if this is gonna work for me.
It's a mystery where round goes.
Okay, so where was Khorasan really? I think we've made this a long durée survey. And actually, I think the simplest way is to ignore the political and other boundaries and look at the geography, specifically the geology of it. So here you have a map of arable land in the region, with green being irrigated croplands and yellow being rain-fed. And actually, Khorasan is basically wherever you can find melons and saffron growing. And you can find that quite easily. So it's quite a simple solution, but we can think maybe beyond our political and historical labels to understand where Khorasan really was. Thank you.